afternoon. This is John Marceno with Probate Matters. So today I want you to imagine a case that took 57 years to get to final distribution. Imagine this case also having, sort of, if you read it, it would read like a Hollywood script. It's got, intrigue, it's got villains, it's got wealth, very wealthy families. It's got, sort of society's faux pas. It's got, forbidden romances and everything along the way. So let's jump into it because it's a pretty interesting case. And yes, it's all true. So this story begins in the early 1800s. So, at the turn of the century, there was a gentleman, a wealthy businessman by the name of Daniel Clark. And he winds up meeting a socialite named Zaleem Carrier. Now, Zaleem and Daniel get together, they fall in love, and they wind up getting married. Sounds like the beginning of a beautiful start. They also have a daughter named Myra that they bring into the world, Myra Clark Gaines. And so, kind of seems like it would be a great Norman, sort of Rockwell beginning, right? The great American family. The problem is that the two of them, when they got married, well, they were already married to other people. And so, they kind of ignored that they were married and they fell in love with each other anyway. And they ignored their husbands and wives and they got married to each other. And so obviously, in that sort of situation, it could never end well. And it didn't. And so eventually their marriage, although they tried to make it work and tried to ignore their first marriages like they really weren't married, well, their marriage actually winded up not working out as well. It's probably not a big surprise. But unfortunately, who was caught up in that was Myra Clark Gaines. So Myra was their daughter that was born to them. So, Daniel, being a very wealthy businessman, and he was wanted to find himself in politics down the road. He decided that he was going to go ahead and ship off his daughter to his friend because he didn't want to feel like he had an illegitimate marriage and an illegitimate child from that marriage. So his friend, Colonel Davis, he wound up with his wife Marion. They took in Myra and raised Myra as if they were, her parents, as if she were their only daughter. And so, off to the races they all went. Eventually, down the road, Daniel winds up passing away. And, what's interesting though is during his life, he did still stay in contact with the Davises, and he, really got to know his daughter. His daughter never knew that she, in fact, was his legitimate daughter, and he was her biological father. They just maintained that, he was a family friend. But he did get to know her, and, from time to time, he did financially support her without her even knowing. So, fast forward many years later, and Myra grows up into a beautiful woman, and she, is going to go ahead and get married. And so as she's kind of going through everything, now remember, Daniel Clark had passed away by this point. But Myra, about to kind of start her new life, is, getting everything ready, and she's going through her, family home, and she discovers letters. And the letters are between Daniel Clark and her parents. And it turns out that Daniel Clark wrote and talked about how he was her father. And so, obviously she discovered this and was just completely blown away. And she did what every, sort of young woman would do, finding out information like this. She went right to her parents and said, Mom and Dad, is this true? Was he really my dad? And so, after a long talk and going through all the letters, they admitted that they had in fact, raised her for Daniel Clark because of the situation that had arisen. And, they acted as her parents and took care of her. but Daniel Clark was in fact her father, her biological father, and Zaleem Carrier was her mother. So upon finding out all this, she decides that she now gets married, and her first husband winds up being an attorney. And so her first husband and her, they decide to go ahead and pursue the case. Now, let me take a step back. When the father passed away, he had a will, and the will was constructed in supposedly 1810. And the will left everything to his mother. And what it also did was it allowed his two business partners to actually be the trustees and manage his affairs. So in 1810, he put that will together, put it in place. And so when he winded up passing away, that is what the court went by. Well, through her discovery process and talking to, other family members and other friends that knew Mr. Clark and were interrelated to her circle, they actually told her that another will was constructed in 1813, and there was another executor, and other than the two businessmen, there was actually another executor, and they actually had talked to the father, and he said that he had enormous guilt about the whole situation, and had decided to rewrite his will, and instead of giving all the money to his mother, decided to leave his fortune to his daughter, Myra. So, she, upon finding out all this, she decides to file a petition in court. Well, from there, the battle begins, and it goes, and, the two trustees, well, they don't give up easily. They didn't just roll over and say, oh, you're right, you're the, rightful daughter. No, they didn't do any of that. They actually battled it out furiously, and, it winded up taking 57 years before Myra actually winded up winning. So her first husband, being an attorney, helped her as much as he could and really got involved with the situation. And it was interesting because back in the 1800s, courts didn't recognize women. They didn't allow them to talk in court. They didn't take what they had to say as being serious. And so, it was a completely different time than it is today. So Myra's husband, he did all the work and really winded up pushing it as far as he could, to the fact that these two other businessmen that were the trustees, well, they were tied in very politically with the establishment at that time. And they actually winded up getting him in a situation where they got him put in jail. And so he winded up spending time in jail. And then when he got out of jail, within about a year after he got out of jail, he winded up getting yellow fever. And when he got yellow fever, it winded up eventually taking his life. So Myra never forgave them for putting him in jail, because she always thought that that was what contributed to him getting yellow fever and ultimately passing away. Now, Myra continued her fight, and then eventually winded up getting married to another man who was actually a hero, a war hero. And this colonel winded up supporting her in her fight to get her legal rights as the heir. So he continued to support her and her claims, and they went case after case after case and pursued it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, what's interesting about this whole situation is that Myra's lawyers actually made her kind of a superstar, or kind of a real celebrity of that time. They kind of painted the two folks that, the two executors or trustees, as villains in the newspapers and monsters, and they were trying to keep this little girl, or this woman, from her rightful inheritance and her family name and fortune. And they kept pushing that narrative. And so she became quite famous, and actually winded up, because this is a time of, when women's suffrage was going on. So she actually became a spokesperson for a lot of the issues in the women's suffrage movement. So, she became a fierce advocate for that. She became a fierce advocate for her own case. And eventually, she got some favorable rulings. The first favorable ruling that she got was they admitted the other will. Now, what was interesting to me when I read the case was they got the will of 1813, which was the one that said that she was to get everything. Well, what was interesting to me is that that will was never found. And they, supposedly or allegedly, the two trustees had, burned it, had gotten rid of it. But through her, all of her witnesses and through all of her, background and everything that she did and evidence, she was able to get the court to actually get that will put into the records, and that was the will that they winded up using. Ultimately, the case went for, like I said, 57 years, and Myra winded up winning the case. Now, I will say, unfortunately, Myra never lived long enough to see the win. She actually died a number of years before the final case was decided in the Supreme Court. So in the end, her heirs winded up getting roughly, $560,000, a little bit more than that. But her attorney bills basically ate up almost all of it. I think in the end, it was reported in the newspaper, although she had won millions at the end of the day because of all the legal fees and all the fighting over 57 years, I think her heirs winded up getting about $60,000. So, it had a lot of craziness that went on in this case, right? Hidden wills, villains that were trying to keep a girl from, her fortune and her legacy, heroes, her husband and others, helping her get that case and prevail eventually, and, ultimately claiming her name. And then she also became a hero of that time frame because she spoke not only about her case and was an advocate of her case, but she was also an advocate for women's suffrage in the women's suffrage movement. So sometimes probate cases bring a lot forward, and in this case, it certainly did that. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please read more about her case, and it really was interesting to me. So again, this is John Marsano from Probate Matters. I look forward to our next case and next review. Thanks again.